Welcome everybody to a brand new episode of the Jams and Tea podcast, where we spin the jams and spill the tea. And this week we are going to be reviewing two brand new records. We are going to be talking about the new record from Boldy James and the Alchemist. We're going to be talking about Bo Jackson, and we're also going to be talking about the latest release from The Killers. We're going to be talking about Pressure Machine. Also be on the lookout for our additional 2 episodes this week. We're going to be releasing on Tyler's recommended album this week, which is, in fact, Los Campesinos. Hold on now, youngster.
Which
Big
is
fucking deal.
My favorite album. So if any of our listeners are interested in hearing me spew about my favorite record with our special guest Connor, who's on
all over you,
who is on our
he's gonna do it
in a hot way, I hope.
Yeah,
you know, like kinky.
I mean, I was
vomit.
there. I experienced it. It was really hot.
Kinky vomit. But anyway, so Connor was with us. It was great. And you should check that video out when it comes out. But you will notice as well. Oh yes, also
Graceland.
Yes, we're doing
We're talking about Graceland 35th anniversary.
We'll do a special video for the anniversary of Graceland as well. So stick around for
Annual jamboree.
You'll notice as well that we're down this week. Down horrendous.
Down bad.
No, we're down August, and Saoirse is unable to make it to the recording this week, and August is in the middle of moving to university, so that's a tumultuous time for the two of them. So the three of us are gonna pull that weight that they inevitably will bring back to us next week, and we're going to have fun. It's going to be more low-key, I think. It's going to be more just to the point, less farting around. Not that I'm going to stop talking. This week, we finished our Radiohead retrospective. We reviewed Moon-Shaped Pool, the last Radiohead album, which means that we have finally reviewed every fucking Radiohead record. If you want to hear what we have to say about that album, whether or not we think it is going to be the last Radiohead album, then check out that video by checking out the channel page. It'll be right there. And if you haven't seen any of the other videos in that series and you're interested as well, there's a playlist that you can check out as well and have fun spooling through. And so, yeah, we're very excited to have finished that. And next week, we're going to be resuming our 1991 retrospective that we halted to do the Radiohead retrospective. We're going to be coming back to that, and that's going to be dominating our Thursday releases for the next month and a half, if not 2 months.
What's the first one we're covering?
Pearl Jam 10.
Oh, shit.
Yeah,
cool.
Because it is turning 30 in like a week and a half, I think. So that's why we're doing that first.
30 and thriving.
Oh, baby.
Why have you said this?
Oh, baby.
Yeah, it's like it's old. So yeah, look out for that. But yeah, Paul Simon Graceland though is this Thursday. That's our Thursday video, and that's going to be fun too. So Jake, what have you been listening to over the last week? Let's do our what we've been listening to segment, truncated, and talk about what we've been listening
to. In a bit of a theme from last week, I haven't really been listening to a whole lot of things outside of what we've been listening to for the podcast but unfortunately August is not around for the Boards of Canada discussion. Is that I listened to GeoGaddy this week for the first time, and I didn't really know anything about that album. And in fact, I think the only thing I knew about it was that August said that he almost liked that as much as Music Has the Right to Children. So I gave that a listen, and oh man, I love that album. It's fucking terrific. And I also listened again to Music Has the Right to Children to figure out which one of these I like more, because I've rated them similarly and I think they're of comparable quality. And I have to say, I think I very narrowly do prefer GeoGaddy. I like them both. They're both very different, like tonally speaking, and they just have very different. It's not even that they have different textures, it's just different approaches to them as a whole. GeoGaddy's a little bit more unfriendly, I think. It's also a little bit less like, there are lots of moments on Music Has the Right to Children that are just plaintively a lot more meditative, more contemplative, whereas GeoGaddy's like kind of aggressive. It's kind of it's an ugly little fucker of an album, and that's kind of why I like it a lot.
I've always maintained that I think GeoGaddy would be a killer record club to do someday.
Oh, Absolutely. I would
Because
100% co-sign.
because you can, like, Music Has the Right to Children is the classic, right? It's always been my favorite one. But Gia Getty is interesting in a lot more ways that I think are conducive to good conversation. For one, the ways in which it kind of mirrors that album in this kind of like poisoned opposite way. So Music Has the Right to Children is this kind of like album about, I guess, the innocence and colorful brightness of youth, like of being really young, and like and all these kind of like nostalgic memories of childhood that are kind of like refracted through the haze of age. And then Gia Getty is like the same sort of textures and stuff, but it's like fucked up. It's like something traumatic has happened that has colored all of these childhood events in this darker tinge. And that is complemented by these really dark songs that have these really kind of morbid, strange sounds. Lots and lots of hidden satanic references that are just like buried in that album. And this general structure where it kind of like gradually disintegrates the more you listen to it, and to the point where it ends with like 2 minutes of pure silence that is the eeriest silence on any album ever, because of what led up to it. So yeah, it's this really just dark and foreboding, but also like it really goes, like as soon as music
Totally.
as soon as Music As Math comes in, like that beat on that song is so like
Oh, fucking excellent. I also had a very similar weird experience with that. Is when I first listened to Music Is the Right to Children, I like one of the songs in the middle of the track list came on and I was like, what the fuck? I've heard this before. And then like I just rifled through my brain and I was just like, this is on the Death Note soundtrack. And then I looked up and found it, and it's like, it's not the exact song, but the song on the Death Note soundtrack is fucking like, it's a miracle that guy has not been hit with a lawsuit. It is like beyond plagiarism levels of the exact same song.
yeah.
And while listening to GeoGaddy, I was just like, I got to like one of the earlier tracks and I was like, oh, I've heard this before. This is in the horror film Sinister. There's a scene where Ethan Hawke is like burning a bunch of photographs, and there's just this eerie piece in the background that's just like this shuffling percussive beat and like these really like distant atonal vocal things happening. And I just thought that was part of the soundtrack. And then I got to that part in the album. I can't remember which track it was exactly, like what it was called, but
that's Gyroscope, I think.
Yeah. And I got to that and I was just like, oh, hey, there's that. That's so strange. I also wanted to ask, just like, again, unfortunately, August isn't here, but I definitely know you know a lot about Boards of Canada. Is that like, I know they have like other albums and stuff, but like, are there any other ones that are like comparable to these two, or are these two just kind of head and shoulders the two titans of the discography?
They're the two titans, but you should still listen. They only have 4 albums, so you should still listen to the other 2 anyway. The third one is like more guitar driven. They bring in like lots of guitar samples and stuff that I think add this extra flavor to it, but it's much more ambient than the first 2. So it's a good chill out album, their third record. And then their fourth record, Tomorrow's Harvest, is like, it's also sort of less in your face and the beats are less heavy, but it's like this very apocalyptic sounding album that is like also kind of really eerie and good. So I definitely think at bare minimum you'll like those 2 albums more than August does. But these first 2, Music Has the Right and Jiggetty, are the titans. And also the EP they put out in between them, In a Beautiful Place Out in the Country, which has my favorite Boards of Canada song on it. It's a song called Zoetrope. Definitely check out, it's only 4 songs. Definitely check out that EP. It's really short. It's like 4 bangers. But yeah, that's kind of the golden era. And I think all you really need to know about Geogetty to get a sense of it is the fact that one of its interludes, and the interludes on Boards of Canada records are always really, really good, incidentally. They're always a big part of the fabric of those albums. But there's the first interlude, or the second interlude on that record, is the music that David Firth uses in the background of every episode of his YouTube series, Salad Fingers. So if you've ever watched... If you've ever watched Salad Fingers and wondered what the hell is that creepy music, that is Boards of Canada's Geogetty.
Yeah.
So
walking around in a dark factory listening to that was fun.
Yeah. Anyway,
but yeah,
really glad you love that record. And every time I see people who have the hot take that it's their favorite, I always respect the shit out of it because it's such a fucking awesome and weird album that I absolutely love. Like it's a strong 9 for me. Don't get me wrong. I love it the same as August. So yeah, cheers to that.
I was curious because I was thinking about it, and I'm sure this is going to be a like, I don't even know how this will be construed, but it's just like, other than the fact that they do share the same like genre and they're like kind of similarly lauded, is that it's like, I don't know if I like an Autechre album as much as I like GeoGaddy, but like as a whole, Autechre are just such a more like diverse musical project. So it's like, it's really strange.
Jake, you don't have to make apologies for that take. It's still a very good take. Like Boards of Canada are titans. I love Boards of Canada. I think that they're absolutely remarkable. I do think that they, have a much more limited quantity of great music than Autechre, but that shouldn't take away from the fact that their best music is unparalleled. And again, appealing because it's so unique and idiosyncratic, and it's this particular shade of IDM, of techno, that is like completely in its own lane. And I love that. And I was a huge Boards of Canada super fan long before I was into Autechre anyway. So they've been in my life for longer, and those two records have a really kind of special place for me. So you don't need to qualify that opinion.
Yeah, and that could totally change just because, I mean, Autechre's Autechre, that's just how they be. I listened to, interestingly enough, another person we've covered on the podcast before, who some of us know, one Mr. Zachary Crouch, aka Noisy Todd, put out an EP semi-recently. I don't know actually how recently, but I know that Saoirse had said something about it, and I was like, oh, I need to check this out. And it was mainly something that Zach made that was heavily inspired by the pandemic, when he was, I believe he did actually get the coronavirus and was just like, got very, very, very sick, and sort of just made a musical expression to sort of channel his frustration from that time, which is called Upside Down. It's an EP, and it's a fascinating musical project that I absolutely did not expect to come from him at all. It's like his, like, we covered his album Guest This 96 on here, and that's sort of like a dark sort of, I guess, trap adjacent sort of hip hop record, and good record. And this is like, it's like if you mesh together Earl Sweatshirt's most recent stuff with Have a Nice Life, and it's a very bizarre exercise in like minimalistic electronic industrial stuff, and it's such a forlorn out. It really did remind me a lot of Earl Sweatshirt's EP Solace in places. It's not quite as like intense, as like atmospherically overbearing as that is, but the dark, minimal, and just like it also just like sounds like the song Telephony, like a lot, like that's just, it sounds like he sampled that song actually, but I'm sure he didn't. But it's just got that kind of, it's a really interesting project. It's not particularly long. I think it's south of 20 minutes. It's an interesting EP. Go check it out from an underground artist who needs a little bit more attention. I can not say where anyone will fall on it. I enjoyed it, but it was like I am incredibly tired and need something to listen to fucking channel my negativity or something. It's really weird, but in a very good way. Well, I gave a listen very, very recently. By very recently, I mean like approximately 2 hours ago, is that I listened to Harry Styles' Fine Line, which, I've listened to that album a fair bit since it's come out. Like, that was a very popular record. Its singles did very, very well, and I definitely listened to the self-titled a great deal as well. I I'm just really fascinated with Styles as like a musical just figure right now. He's kind of in the inception of his career. It's like, you know, he had his early stuff with the band and then just sort of moved on to his own thing. And it's just so dramatically different. And his presentation and style and flair is just so like immediately singular. Like he's the type of artist who really feels like he has something to prove to everyone. And I really want to see where his music goes, because Fine Line as it is just this very much like, you know, in the realm of music as a whole, it's not exactly something that's super like unique or anything, but no one's really doing what he is right now. That his space in the modern musical landscape is very much occupied by himself. And every time I listen to Fine Line, it's just like it's a pretty damn good album. But I see down the line, like it's just like this has so much potential for him to become like a genuine like. The word pop star now is just such a nebulous and almost meaningless designation, but it's like in terms of where he could end up being like a Bowie type person where he just becomes a chameleon.
I would say he's definitely already a pop star. Like I'm sure. That's not to walk back or anything, but what he has the potential to do to me is like change the perception of what a pop star is and what a pop star can do in a similar way to what Bowie did. And I liked Fine Line a great deal, but my prevailing feeling coming away from that record is that I want him to like, he's leaning into a kind of like weirdness and an obliqueness in his presentation and his whole aesthetic. I want him to lean more into it. I want him to really dive in completely, because I feel like he could make some really amazing music. And obviously his voice is incredible. I still think about his cover of Sledgehammer all the time, like just specifically how impeccable his Peter Gabriel impression is. Like
it's also very refreshing to see just like dude is so horny, and like not even in the way that like most music horny. No, Harry Styles is just like, I make music about two things: being sad and fucking.
Yeah.
And it's like,
and he's mostly sad because he's not fucking.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like same, man.
Yeah, no, that's I think one of the best parts about him as well is that like relentless horniness, and I mean that tracks with covering Sledgehammer, right? You know, a song about Peter Gabriel's dick. Like I want Harry Styles to write songs about his dick. I want him to write songs about like, and with that energy, I want him to just really like go full into it and just be this weirdo superstar who is not afraid to just be like, you know, sexual, like, because we have a lot of great and inspiring sexually free music from a lot of the great female pop artists of the moment. I want to see more men leaning into a version of that as well, and I want to see that kind of like thing happening from male pop stars as well, because like there's a sense in which like male pop stars are sanitized now. Like a lot of the male pop stars are rappers, and it's within this very specific niche of rap music. I want to see more people like Harry Styles doing that and bringing that back. Like
and regardless of like, I don't know if he said it made any elaborations upon his specific sexuality or whatnot, but thing is that like dude could be straighter than an arrow, but the way he presents himself is just like the inherent flexibility that he has, and the lengths he goes to appear as though he is anything but is only a good thing.
Yeah, just the way he plays with image is really like awesome and cool, and you know, it feels like it has the power to really inspire a new wave of men in pop music, which I want to see. Like it's been a long time since the era where we had men dominating pop music, and even then a lot of the history of that, modern era history of that, is deeply tied up with like R&B and stuff, which has its own hang-ups. Like I think of Harry Styles now as kind of like not dissimilar to what Justin Timberlake was in the 2000s, except like a much kind of more outwardly camp version of that, which is awesome. Like it's
trajectory, because they were both in the boy band that was kind of sanitized, kind of like an industry thing, but then they all kind of, you know, they broke out and he was like the real defined talent.
Totally. Yeah. No, I so look forward to whatever he ends up doing next.
Yeah.
what I've been listening to, I have a few things I want to shout out. First thing I want to shout out is that our regular viewer and commenter Tremendous put me on to some music that they're involved in. It is a band called Fukulim Sexatron. And so they sent me this record that Fukulim Sexatron put out. I don't think Tremendous was specifically involved in the music of this record, but I think they're responsible for the artwork, which is very like fitting once you hear the music. It's batshit. But anyway, this is like a weird sort of noise rock, noise pop, eclectic sort of thing. It's like a cross of Black Dresses and Ween. It's very like off the wall, avant-garde, strange, loud, noisy, people making noise type of shit.
All right.
And I enjoyed it quite a bit. It's a really short album. It has song titles on it like National Eggs, Human Taxidermy Particle Accelerator, and Dick Floss, which are just some great song titles. But yeah, no, I thought that it was really interesting and really funny and really bizarre in a way that's kind of awesome to see people just unabashedly making like straightforwardly fucking nutso music. So yeah,
Always refreshing.
Fukulim Sexatron's new album. It's called what's it called? It's called National Eggs is the album title as well. I will make sure there's a link to it on the Bandcamp in the description of this video. You can go and listen to it. Like I said, it's very short. Support them because they seem to be doing some really interesting stuff. And thank you, Tremendous, for putting me onto that. In terms of other things I've been listening to this week, one thing I want to shout out is another album that I kind of tossed up with putting on the schedule for this week and ended up going with a different record instead. Is I listened to the new Liars album, The Apple Drop. And I want to emphasize, I didn't take this off the schedule because it's not a good album. I think it's a really good album. I just didn't think it would quite inspire the level of conversation, or at least the level of like, analysis that the two albums we're reviewing today are kind of can be partial to. But the new Liars album is really good. I wouldn't put it up with their absolute best albums, but it is very decisive in its sound. It's very immediate. It's very pretty in a way that I wasn't quite expecting from a Liars record. There's a lot of kind of beautiful moments in this. There's a lot of noisy moments in this. There's a lot of great synth and guitar textures. It is the first Liars album with a full band since 2014's Mess. And so it's great to see that project back with a full band again. And I really enjoyed it. The singles on this record are especially great. There is a fantastic song called Big Appetite, which really stood out to me as one of the best Liars songs, full stop. If you enjoy Liars, definitely give this new record a spin. It's probably not going to blow your mind. It's certainly not one of the best things they've ever made, but that's really only because they set a really high standard for themselves. It's still a really good album. It still really holds true to the Liars' mission statement of never making something that sounds anything like their previous work. You can hear maybe shades of Sister World and Wish You in certain textures on this album, but really it's a completely new sound for Liars, par for the course. And I found it really enjoyable. I listened to it a couple of times this week and I enjoyed it quite a bit. So shout out to the new Liars record. Definitely worth your time if you have an interest. Oh, yes. One more thing I do want to talk about. A great album that I listened to for the first time this week that I fully recommend. One of the best records I've heard in a while. A classic ambient record from the Japanese ambient artist Hiroshi Yoshimura. His landmark album from 1982 called Music for 9 Postcards. This is the most beautiful ambient music I've ever heard. And that is a bold statement that I fully stand by. It is very much in the vein of like Brian Eno's Ambient One Music for Airports, but it's better, in my opinion, a better album, a more well-rounded musical experience, a more kind of emotionally complex sound, if that makes any sense for ambient music. Like Music for Airports is just like plaintive, pretty sounding music. And Music for Postcards is that, but it's like also like there's some sadness and melancholy in it as well. It sounds like when I listen to it, I picture like snow falling gently in a Japanese landscape. and it's very calming and it's very beautiful, and the repetition is very hypnotic. And so if you ever need any purely calming music to listen to, if you're tense, you're anxious, or you just need some kind of ambient soundtrack to whatever you're doing, Music for 9 Postcards, high recommendation from me. It is an absolutely stunning album, and obviously, of course, a huge influence on August's music with Glacier Flower as well. So obviously, if you enjoy Glacier Flower, you'll enjoy Hiroshi Yoshimura. And Music for 9 Postcards is a stellar release, one of the best ambient records I've ever heard.
I added that to my library after seeing you and Zach talk about it.
Yeah, it's you'll absolutely, the second that record starts, Jake, you'll be in. I know you'll really love that album.
Hell yeah.
Yep. So yeah, and that's basically my week. So on that note, let's get into the first of our 2 major reviews for today, which is this is the 6th Killers album, I want to say. I think no, 7th. It's the 7th Killers album. I always forget about Wonderful Wonderful because that record's so anonymous. But anyway, it's a second Killers album we're reviewing after last year's Imploding the Mirage, which in the general public anyway, certainly not on this podcast, but I mean, I love that record to a certain extent. I love certain songs on that record. I think that record was a big breath of fresh air for the Killers after some pretty stale albums that preceded it. Although I admittedly have my own sort of guilty pleasure enjoyment of albums like Day and Age and Battleborn to a certain extent, but Imploding the Mirage, I think, was their most vital sounding album since Sam's Town, and had some, and a large part of that was due to Sean Everett's production. Coming off the back of working with acts like the War on Drugs, he brought the goods to make their Heartland rock sound feel very punchy and effective, particularly on the big singles of that record, songs like My Own Soul's Warning and Caution. Caution, incidentally, I think is one of their best songs ever. So I revisited that record this week. I was delighted with the fact that it held up better than I remembered it. I think it's probably one of their best records. And so I listened to that in preparation for Pressure Machine, because Pressure Machine also produced by Sean Everett, but a very different kind of record. And I'm not going to say any more than that because I know Jake has a bit that Jake wants to get into with regard to introing this new record, and I'll let Jake take over.
So, as Tyler just mentioned, so the second Killers album we reviewed Imploding the Mirage pretty early on in our podcast repertoire. And generally speaking, collectively, we were not really into that album. I think Tyler and Morgan definitely presented what can be called at best a lukewarm defense in their own words, because I did watch the episode back just to prepare for this one. And I, of course, got assaulted for the incredibly unpopular and hot take that the Killers aren't as popular anymore, which is something that no one has ever thought ever. And it's interesting because this new album, Pressure Machine, especially in relation to the one before it, as Tyler mentioned, it's produced by Sean Everett, guy who produced the last album, produced albums like, we talked about some of them last week. He produced, I think most notably, The War on Drugs, A Deeper Understanding, which is definitely a comparable album sonically, I think, to this one. And yeah, upon first glance, this was sort of a surprise release. I found out about it because of Morgan and through the fact that Phoebe Bridgers features on one of the tracks. And it's coming out, and lack of relative fanfare just sort of put it in a strange place, because I mean, it's not like there is a ton of attention on the Killers to begin with anyway. If you look at the sales for Imploding the Mirage compared to, I mean, everything they've ever made, it's definitely clear that they're, you know, in a place in terms of their success, despite the fact that you can tell that Brandon Flowers is really making music that he wants to make. And just contextually, with everything we have right now, Pressure Machine feels innocuous almost. It's very much in the same vein as the previous album. It's playing with the same sounds, generally speaking. It has Flowers leaning even further in to his attempt at sort of just embodying a Bruce Springsteen or a Bruce Springsteen pastiche. There are moments on this album that sound not only like it's taken off of some of his most popular singles, but there are synths on here that sound just straight ripped off from Born in the USA. And, you know, a lot of the complaints with Imploding the Mirage were that it was kind of an album that felt very vague. It felt kind of formless in terms of its writing and content. It didn't really feel like the band knew what the band knew what they wanted to sound like, and we had varying opinions as to how well they captured how well they were or what they wanted to sound like. But in terms of lyricism and content, it didn't really feel like they were quite there. And on Pressure Machine, there's really nothing here lyrically that you haven't heard before in albums that do sound like it, and albums that are from artists like Bruce Springsteen, Heartland Rock, and things like the Gaslight Anthem or Brian Fallon. There isn't anything on here even that Sean Everett's producing that he hasn't done before. There's just an air about it that almost feels kind of unassuming. It's something that it's not something that you can't get somewhere else if you look hard enough. And it's one of the best albums I've heard all year.
It's the songwriting, I think, is the thing that really separates it from all those things.
The two things about it that, to me anyway, because I went back and listened to Imploding the Mirage just to sort of inform this discussion, and whereas Tyler's opinion grew, mine actually kind of soured, and I was notably fairly negative on it. I mean, I wasn't anywhere near August, or even Saoirse was more unkind to it than I was. But that said, on Imploding the Mirage, there is a general sense of a lot of those melodies and hooks are kind of awkward. They're kind of labored. It just doesn't feel like Flowers fully understood how to nail down the vibe that he wanted to go for. And here it's like he stumbled through the last album to firmly implant his feet in this one. Because while there's definitely a fragility to his voice and something about it that just, I mean, it sounds a lot like, well, late era Springsteen, where it's sort of got that soulful heartland rock kind of Southern swagger to it, but it's also kind of, there's a weird fragility. There are some times where he puts a little bit too much emphasis on some of the hooks on here, or a little bit like parts of a specific aspect of a song will be slightly overwritten. That said, the way everything is mixed and the raw gravitas of the performances make it so that these things just do not matter at all. Every single thing here is firmly locked into place, and it's such a leap up from the last record, in my opinion, which just every step of the way it stumbled a little bit in something. And overall, when you have an album that's a little bit more ephemeral and isn't really like solidly grasping at anything, it tends to crumple and wither a bit if you don't know what you're doing. And here, immediately with the first song, this shit, I can't fucking believe this is the same band that made Sam's Town, and this is the same band that made Hot Fuss. It doesn't sound anything fucking like them. And this sounds like it fits them like a glove. If the previous album never happened, then this would be so unprecedented. It would be one of the most ingenious musical turns I think I've ever heard in my life. West Hills is one of the best opening songs to an album I've heard all year. The sort of plaintive pianos that it starts off with, the really, really great sense of storytelling that Brandon brings all over this album is so present here. A lot of the lyrics have to do with that of the opioid crisis, which Morgan and I live in Kentucky. Appalachia is rife with that particular problem right now. And, as somebody who has seen people experience that and who has lived with and has family who live where that is a huge problem, I can speak to the authenticity with which it's delivered, and it really, really rings true. This is stuff that I wouldn't expect from people who have been doing this their entire career to be able to nail down as well as Brandon does here. The actual songwriting is just astonishing. The storytelling I already spoke to, but it's like each song is very clearly about like a character. There's that Nebraska Springsteen sort of thing he comes to it where he's really just portraying an environment, which is also emphasized by the spoken word bits, which are all very, very brief. And by the way, love that they released a version of the album that does not have these spoken word bits, even though I personally think they add to the experience. But, good on them for knowing that, maybe if you just want the songs, you just want the songs. Good on them. But personally, I really think they add something to it because they really remind me of all things of early Godspeed You Black Emperor records. There's a droning, omnipresent dread in the back of these where it's just these people talking about the place that they live or what they're doing, or like, a girl will talk about, you have to be a certain age to hunt around here. There's a heartbreaking story about a girl whose horse dies and she stays next to it as it dies. And just people from all over this place in which, they're singing about. And it just, the claustrophobic nature is sort of emphasized by these really minimal musical ideas that are in the background to it. And it leads into each song really, really, really well. And my God, when Morgan last week said that it's like a deeper understanding in terms of its production, it's like, yeah, Sean Everett produced it, blah, blah, blah. But like, this has the same weight that album has. That fucking distorted guitar solo thing that happens like midway through Cody, like, oh fuck, it's like I'm listening to like Pain on A Deeper Understanding, and it's got that same feeling to it. And oh man, there's this part on the title track where Flowers just he hits an octave I've never heard him hit before and just carries this little part of the melody. And then eventually it like syncopates into the strings in that song, which, I cried. I cried like a baby listening to that song driving home from my shift one day this week. Yeah. It is one of the best moments in music all year.
I thought that vocal line was Phoebe again.
I thought it was a female vocalist.
I did too for a second. And then you realize it is him, and it's this like holy shit moment of like he's just reached this new level.
The only thing I really want to like, I think this will just be more of a group discussion thing, but I just wanted to lead off with the fact that it's like I'm well aware that this album has like, I kind of feel like, if I can once again reference our YouTube father, Mike the Snare, when he talked about My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy in his best albums of the decade list, and he started off that segment by just listing a bunch of things that he didn't like about the album. And he's just like, okay, great. Everything I just said, that's 5% of this album. And the rest of it makes it so that 5% doesn't matter. That's how I feel about this album, is that it has things. It's like, is it terribly original? No. Is it, in either content or in sound? No. Are there moments on it lyrically that I think are just ever so slightly weaker? I think songs like Cody and songs like Desperate Things, which are great songs, capital G great, have lyrical moments in them where I'm like, if you just changed like this one little thing or this one little line or just this one thing where it's like, it's evident that, he didn't completely perfect his storytelling right out of the gate, or it's just kind of like you'll have a line like on, I think, Desperate Things, where it's the sort of delivery and even the line, when you're in love, you can be blinded by your own heart, which is just kind of like, it was maybe a bit too maudlin for that. It's just like, just change that like a tiny bit.
Yeah.
And then it's flawless. That said, I still love the songs that even most prominently feature these problems. And then there are the songs that are just absolute the standouts. Like West Hills, in my opinion, one of the best songs of the year. The song featuring Phoebe, Runaway Horses, which is just oh god, that's a song with some metaphors in it, and that makes me feel some shit. But like this, I've listened to this album more than most albums this year. I think the album that I listened to most previously that released this year was the Sweet Trip album, and this just has so much authenticity. Like the thing you need to nail when you make an album like this is sounding like you give a shit about the people in it, because this album thematically is about small town America. It's about people who are born into these places, trapped there, and are going to die there, and are more than likely miserable or lying to themselves to make themselves get through the day. But there's also, it's not like this thing where it's like this privileged view of this particular part of America where it's like, oh, everything sucks. It's like, no, there are parts on the album where it showcases that there are people who find happiness and comfort and simplicity in the better sides of life here. It's a multifaceted portrait, like on the title track, Pressure Machine. And these things come off as very, very, very genuine. And I think the last thing I'll say is that it's like, this has moments like a deeper understanding where it just soars, like at the beginning of West Hills, where he just does where he talks about, like when he gets to the point of the song where he goes to jail for being arrested with heroin, and then he talks about dying and then going to heaven and knowing that God will overlook his mistakes to allow him the freedom to be in to the West Hills, in that heaven. And I'm just like, fuck, man, that's some heavy shit. And then there's the storytelling moments like that are everywhere. In a Car Outside is another moment which is just absolutely fucking show-stopping. Just the way that he's able to paint the portrait of all of these people's lives up until this point and their scenarios, and how, you know, this character having this moment to himself where it's like, oh, he's got his wife in the house with his kid, and, you know, he's talking about being unfaithful, or there's like things like Desperate Things, which is just like this chronicle of this sheriff. Reminds me of a lot of Highway Patrolman off of Nebraska. It's, oh god, I could sing the praises of every single song on here, even the ones that I think that are like notably like lesser, and even then they're only lesser in the most marginal of ways. Morgan's hyperbole last week was not unfounded. This is easily one of my favorite albums of the year.
It's also notable in the way that when August made the stop posting about foxing joke last week, in regards to my hyperbole, I will say what Tyler said, is that I have been restrained.
You have. I knew you did. You hit that with 5 stars on Rate Your Music, and I'm just like, I can feel Morgan is the fucking, like, there's something inside him that is threatening to spill out, and he is doing everything to contain it. So applause, man.
Yeah. And I the biggest coping I did with that was just listen to the album 25 times.
Yep.
Couple of things to pick up on from what Jake said. And with regard to authenticity, I don't think that this band, like, I don't think you necessarily need to have like a worn authenticity in these kinds of records. It certainly helps, but I think that Brandon Flowers as a writer wouldn't be able to write this well if it weren't his experience. And that's the thing that this comes back to as well. This is an autobiographical album. It's not just, I'm going to write a concept album about small town America. It's about Brandon Flowers' childhood specifically, and the things that he experienced and the people that he was surrounded by and the environment that he was in. In many ways, I want to call Sufjan Stevens and say, you can tick Utah off the list because the Killers have just made Utah the album. And so when you think about it in relation to the other Killers records, like you think about how different it is, it's because Killers are a Las Vegas band. They're a Nevada band. Their sound is defined by where they came up as musicians and that kind of like glammy artifice of that world. And one of the things I enjoy about Imploding the Mirage. And the other Killers records that I really like is that, yeah, you can see that it's all artifice. You can see that the whole surface of it is artifice, and I can see how that would put people off. But it's kind of like this really like committed to selling that artifice in this really like heartfelt way through the passion of it, which, it's like, as someone who's selling you something artificial in a cynical way is going to be really grating. But I've always kind of resonated with Brandon Flowers because he does have no illusions about the music he makes not being like laden with artifice, but he like really soulfully like leans into that in the same way as someone like Meatloaf on an album like Battleborn has big Meatloaf vibes, because yeah, it's corny as shit, and yeah, it's like obviously really like unreal and like this kind of fake, very kind of like cliche rendition of this sort of thing, but it's sold with such passion that it becomes endearing to me. But Pressure Machine is different, right? Because it's this whole different approach. It's not a Las Vegas record. It is a Utah record through and through. It is going back to his roots. In many ways, when I listen to this, probably because just of the general sound of the Killers, I think less of Nebraska Springsteen and more of Born to Run, Darkness on the Edge of Town Springsteen. It has this
definitely a synthesis of all of them, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're right. And you're 100% like a song like Desperate Things definitely pulls from that Highway Patrolman, Nebraska era thing. But like, and obviously like the record ending with the Getting By is like not dissimilar to the way that Nebraska ends with Reason to Believe, right? Very similar tone and emotional core of those songs and sentiment. But what I love is that the real kind of hard on sleeve, emotional, like to the core shit that the Killers do best, when that comes through on this record in the really passionate, powerful ways, it reminds me a lot of Born to Run. Like specifically West Hills is like the Killers.
Oh, yeah.
That is the Killers' Born to Run, the song, I think, because it's a very similar sort of sentiment, and it is it's stunning. I completely agree that it is one of the best songs of the year. It's absolutely my favorite song on this album. I think it's one of the best songs they've ever made. It's moving. It's incredible. It's for all of the things that you've said and more. My other favorite on this record is interesting because it's kind of like the inverse. It's less spectacle and it's more definitely more alongside the Nebraska side of things. But I absolutely adore the track Terrible Thing, which is this very heartbreaking story of this person who is struggling with their sexuality in this very conservative Mormon Utah landscape. And there's this great line about being in the closet and existing in this landscape where he says, around here we will take up our cross and hang on his holy name, but the cards that I was dealt will get you thrown out of the game, which is a great metaphor and very effective. And I like the recurring lyrical motif of I'm at the end of every verse of I'm in my bedroom on the verge of a terrible thing, like that constant reminder of the fact that this landscape has put this person in a suicidal place, and no matter what ideas and scenes and details are explored throughout the rest of the song, it always comes back to that because that is the overriding feeling, and it's heartbreaking. The way he depicts this spectacle of bullfighting in this song as well, this kind of carnal, arcane, ugly
sacrifice.
Yeah, this kind of sacrificial
sacrifice to some deity of some kind.
Yeah, and it's like it's this commentary on they are barbaric and they engage in these like awful, strange and ritualistic things, and yet they regard this pure expression of humanity that this person is trying to do by living as this foreign, alien, unacceptable thing. Like and the sacrificial overtones of that imagery and the violence and the bloodiness of it in relation to obviously gay violence and hate crimes and stuff. It is really potent because it's not signposted in this really obvious way. It's very lyrically nuanced and suggested through metaphor in a way that lets you put the pieces together and makes it all the more devastating. And then
Oh, yeah.
you do contrast that with a song like Desperate Things, which is another song I really love, where it's like the verses in the song are amazing. The storytelling, the scenes that are set of this highway patrolman, I don't even know if specifically that's what you call him. It's just the Springsteen
Never
thing.
had much patience for guys who hit besides or for more than the obvious reasons is the lyric that always gets me.
Yeah, I also love the line like I asked if she wanted me to take him in, she laughed it off like lemonade. That's such a surreal line. Like I don't even know what it means to laugh it off like lemonade, but it's
it's so like light and airy to just demonstrate it. Like it's like, oh, she laughed it off like something so small. It's just like that just breaks my heart even more, honestly.
Yeah. But again, what's great about the storytelling and the verses of the song is how he just gives you a little bit of a hint of the scene and these little details, like the way she undid the button to her dress to tell you about their relationship and the connection that's forming. And then the real subtlety of the last verse, where there's like the vaguest allusion to a canyon that is the only real hint at what's actually happening in the scene, which is him kind of taking this drunken, abusive figure and basically like killing him, throwing him into the desert. But he never, like, you don't get that. That's a very vague hint, and it's reinforced by that for more than just obvious reasons, repetition, which is again a great motif. So that's amazing. And then the chorus is like, it's just too on the nose. It kind of sours it. It's like, when you're in love, you can be blinded by your own heart. You bend your own truth, so twist it up. You could justify sin. And when people are in love, are desperate enough to abandon their dreams, they do desperate things. Like that's implied, my dude, and everything else you're singing in the song. Like you don't need to. Yeah. You don't need to spell that out. So, but anyway, it's a very minor quibble. I agree with what you said, that the rest of the song is so moving that you kind of can overlook it. But it does irk me a little bit because the song is close to perfect. But that said, that kind of storytelling, I think, is when the record is at its absolute strongest. But also, like, the band are so in tune with what's happening as well and what they're trying to communicate. Like in that song, it's very spare, but then in the final verse of the song, you get like this intrusion of noise in this final scene as they're traveling in this patrol car, and it really adds to the sense of foreboding and like threatening ominousness of this car journey, and it adds to that implicit like murder is happening without telling you. And it's a great sort of real subtle detail that I absolutely love. And on the note of the spoken word pieces as well, what I love about them is that it's not just that they add to the scene that's being set. It's that each one of them at the start of each song kind of gives you they're related to the topics of the songs, right? They're specifically placed in the songs because they tell you what the songs are going to be about in a certain sense. And that is, I love that. I love that they're not just there for atmosphere. They're there because they're connected with the songs and the songwriting, and they aid with the setting of that scene. Another absolute highlight on the record for me is in the car outside, which I think is an absolutely stunning song. I absolutely love the instrumental propulsion of the song, the way that it builds. A lot of these songs are not afraid to go on for longer and longer as well, to allow the room for the stories to really develop and for the music to develop as well. But I love the way that this kind of turns into a New Order song by the end of it. Like it reminded me heavily of New Order by the time you get to the end of the song with the synths and stuff.
Totally.
And I love that. But I also love, again, this is another one of the storytelling highlights as well, because it's this kind of character study of this relationship, and specifically from this male perspective. And it's this narrator who you get the sense he doesn't understand a lot about the emotions of his partner, and he doesn't have a lot of emotional intelligence about understanding, the effect of his actions and why, his partner is maybe feeling the confused, conflicted way that she is. It's this very delicate thing where he puts it like, she's got this thing where she puts up the wall so high, it doesn't matter how much you love, it doesn't matter how hard you try, which is a really devastating line, because it both speaks to the truth of someone isolating themselves for their own protection and to the cluelessness that people often feel when they don't know how to deal with that. It's this really devastating little detail. And the scene that's set as well is so vivid. We've got a place with a fence and little grass. I put this film on the windows and it looks like chapel glass.
It's like chapel glass.
Again,
I love that line.
That little subtle reminder of the kind of Mormon landscape, the religious landscape of this place. When she turns, it's like the shadow of the cross don't cast no blessing over our lonely life. It's like waiting for a train to pass, and I don't know when it will pass. That's just beautiful. And incidentally, I love when writers are confident enough to just, instead of trying to come up with a clever line, they just use the same word twice to add extra impact. It's like waiting for a train to pass, and I don't know when it'll pass. That line is so much more effective because it has that blunt repetition of past rather than a different word. And it really embeds you in the stasis, right? The sense of not moving forward that this person is experiencing. And also there's like other moments where there's like a lyric that's a little bit clunky, but it works because it reflects an emotional truth. Like, for example, when she cries like a train, it's a lot. Like, that's kind of a clunky line, but it's also like bluntly powerful as well. Like,
same when he goes like, she used to set the room on fire, swear to God.
Yeah, totally. And it's intermingled with this more poetic stuff, like it's like a flood of grief and sorrow from a haunted life. And that juxtaposition of that poetic stuff with this kind of like words fail me sort of directness is powerful. Adds a lot. And then the way the story develops with him getting in touch with this older person, this older relationship rekindling, and then it's like you get the chorus, when the chorus is repeated, the chorus melody is repeated, but the setting is transposed to this new relationship where he's like, he's talking about her, and he says, if she never needed a helping hand, I would lend, swear to God. And then it's like the part of me that's screaming not to jump gets lost in the sound of the train. It's a lot. Again, coming full circle with that lyrical motif into this new situation. And then the last part of the song, he's just like fragments of sentences, trying hard not to care, swear to God. And the outro of the song is kind of transcendent, to be honest. He's just kind of wailing those words, and it's like I get goosebumps the way it all sounds.
Yep.
It's fucking, it just gets under my skin. And
especially with the way trains are kind of contextualized thematically earlier on Small Town, where they have that sort of that one spoken word piece that's just like, people see jumping in front of the train, killing themselves is the only way to get out of here. And then in that song, it talks about two people who are stealing parts from like a factory to be able to sell them and get money, and then they're like a young couple, and they get hit by this train and they die, and then it's just like some shit like that's not supposed to happen here.
Yeah,
it's like, fuck.
Yeah, Brandon tells a story about the inspiration for the song, about when he was in 8th grade and two seniors got hit by a train. He remembers their names, and he said about how, I was surprised to find 25 years later how much I was still affected by it. It felt like it was the end of an innocence for me and for the town, because afterwards I noticed things started to happen. It was almost like opening this door of darkness. A lot of times we talk about stagnation with snarky terms, and I think it's one of the things that it's associated with towns like Nephi. But it can also be a beautiful thing, because it's these people that are holding on to ideals and traditions. I hope that it never changes in that respect. And so that's a beautiful sentiment as well, this notion of stagnation as this defense mechanism, as opposed to just this purely tragic thing. Like little towns like Nephi, for all of the ugliness of their underbelly, can be preserving themselves in a way that reflects the human endurance and the human will to survive, even if it means like shutting yourself off from progression because of how terrifying that can be. And so it's a real emotionally complicated idea about these kinds of landscapes that goes a lot deeper than most songwriters do when looking at this kind of thing. And not just like the tragedy and the way that these places exist, but how the way that these places have molded themselves is a method of survival, is a method of strength. And it's not to say that that is something, admirable or positive necessarily, because it disguises an underbelly of oppression and hatred and death and pain, but it's just the complicated truth of reality. is that the beauty and ugliness in these things go hand in hand. There's a beauty in the utter fucking heartbreaking devastation of this place. And I think Brandon understands that complex emotional relationship, and he tries to reckon with it on this album. And that's the most compelling aspect of it to me, is the way that he continues to reckon with and go from songs like Terrible Thing, where he's telling this really gut-wrenching story of how this stasis and it creates the environment where people are hounded to their death. And obviously Quiet Town is a reflection of that in a different sort of way, but also that this isn't a just purely tragic, morbid thing. It is just a complicated piece of reality. And yeah, I love that. I love how complicated this album is in that regard. I love how sad and beautiful it is at the same time.
I really feel like it's prescient, honestly, just because, not to make it all about current year or whatever, but like, I feel like a lot of stuff in the media ever since this whole, COVID shit happened is that like, there's just sort of a dismissiveness that the way that not only just like people, but generally speaking, so-called, sympathetic, typically liberal people who just sort of just kind of dismiss the South as just like this monolith and just don't, they just sort of treat it as just like, oh, fuck everybody there. And it's just like, I need more art like this that exposes, not to say that it's this one thing that it's this good, unequivocally good thing. It's like, no, it's a complicated thing with real, actual human beings with beating hearts that are here that you can't just dismiss with a hand wave,
Yeah.
And I think that's part of so much of what we're getting at here is encapsulated by the final track, The Getting By, which is at the core of it is kind of like, maybe it's not all of this horrible stuff that erodes away at one's well-being, because as people we're pretty good at blocking that stuff out, especially if it's not happening to us and it's just things happening to other people. But the fact that you are always having to cope with it is what slowly wears you down. And I think that it's really fantastic final thesis statement for the album.
Yeah, like, and that's the thing you have to remember as well, is that these people have adapted, the people in these songs have adapted to live their lives and be able to survive and be happy. They don't see their lives as this tragic thing that a lot of artists will paint them out to be for the sake of pathos and for the sake of mining meaning. These are stories about people who live their lives in the best way they know possible, and in order to be happy in whatever way that they can. And it's beautiful to have that communicated in an album in such an uncomplicated and straightforward way. Yeah, it's just not something that you see a lot in songwriting.
Oh, absolutely. I will say that I again, because the reception, especially amongst my podcast mates here, is so what it is. But like, I think this is like I said in the beginning segment, I love Hot Fuss. I think that's a really like great album for what it is and all. But like, I just think this is head and shoulders their best work. Nothing really competes with it for me. Like, even if it's a comparable, like, I wouldn't say that it's like, it's comparable in terms of quality, but in terms of like lasting appeal and in terms of like what an achievement it is, yeah, I got nothing. It's this or nothing, frankly.
It's kind of funny you say that, because it's like the least Killers album. I mean, it is still recognizably a Killers album.
It's the least Killers, but it's the most Brandon Flowers. So
yeah, it's still recognizably, like, the themes and stuff are stuff that they've mined and talked about heavily on, basically every record. So like, it's still recognizably, the tangible thread is there, but it is like, it's kind of like,
it sounds to me like what the Killers should have been making 10 years ago.
Yeah, probably.
If one followed the natural progression,
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think they're kind of playing catch up. I mean, even Brandon Flowers did an interview with Stephen Hyden, and he talked about all of their albums, including this one. And he said that, yeah, when we did Battleborn and Wonderful Wonderful, we were basically on autopilot for those albums. Like he's not particularly proud of them. So even he would be the first to admit that they're playing catch up with this and the previous record in terms of, with the two of them, I guess, trying to capture every facet of the Killers' sound and what the Killers can be. And so in that sense, I think even though they're very distinct, and even though some of the opinions on the two of them in this podcast are very kind of cleaved, they're kind of like records that go together in my mind. I think that's part of the reason why they were produced together as well, is that there are these two very different visions of what the Killers can be at their most, I guess, focused and zeroed in on what their identity as musicians and songwriters. And this Pressure Machine, which, I'm not going to have a super hot take. It's definitely, I think, the best Killers album since Hot Fuss. But it has this real tangible depth and sweetness and sadness and emotionality to it that I didn't know that Brandon Flowers, not that I didn't know Brandon Flowers had it in him, but I didn't even know Brandon Flowers was interested in exploring with such sincerity. Because like I said, that pastiche element is part of the joy of the Killers to me. That kind of like, we're having a lot of fun and we're throwing our whole pussies into this, but it ain't that serious, chief, is the whole thing with their music. And then they've made this record where it's like, we don't betray that sound that we have.
What if it was serious?
But yeah, like we actually can prove that we actually can do serious if we want to. And so it's this new shade, completely new shade of them that makes it feel so rewarding, that makes it feel so impactful, that makes it feel so immediately great and like, fuck yeah, because it's so, out of left field for them.
Yeah, like it's kind of, you said it's the kind of album that they should have been making, and in many respects that's right. But I also think if they did try it earlier on, that this probably wouldn't be as good or as refreshing as it would be, because it's like, I feel like this convergence needed to happen. Like I feel like, and like, not to demean any of the word, I feel like I've spoken as to the core, like the fundamentals of the album being very much strong things, but like, this album, as much as it needs those fundamentals, it also needs Sean Everett as a producer, who I think is doing some of his best work since A Deeper Understanding, frankly. It's like, yeah, it's a lot of the same tricks that he's pulling, but also at the same time, they work really fucking well here.
You could also make the case as well that some of its strength, to a certain extent, comes from the narrative of the Killers as a band and the downslope period that they've been through. Which is not to say that this record wouldn't be great if it came out 10 years ago, but that it does benefit to a certain extent from the kind of underdog place that the Killers have come to occupy, despite being like this huge world conquering band who have one of the most significant and most played songs of the last 20 years. They still have kind of become underdogs in a weird way. And I guess in a sense, you could say it's kind of like almost a companion record to Sam's Town in a certain extent, because that's like this Las Vegas record through and through, right? And it's very kind of like glitzy, and it has all of that feel and design of a record made about that particular place and occupying that particular era and time. And this is like, does for rural Utah what Sam's Town did for Las Vegas in its own way. And so that mode of the Killers, when they're really zeroed in on capturing a particular aesthetic, a particular place, a particular mindset, is a really tends to be quite a rewarding one for me. I mean, assuming you're on board with Sam's Town, which I am, I think that's a really good record too. But yeah, this is absolutely, Hot Fuss is just kind of this peerless thing where it's like, there's not much that's conceptually interesting about it. It just happens to be fucking great. Like the songs are just really, really fucking good. But I also think to a certain extent that its lack of, I guess, conceptual fascination perhaps makes it less enduring in the mind than something like this, which has these beautifully great, amazing, captivating songs, and also leaves you with something that resonates in your soul long beyond the time when you're not listening to it. And for the Killers to have produced something like that, I have to fucking applaud them, because it's amazing and great to see.
Yeah, I guess the only things I have left to say aren't really specific, but I was worried that this, for me anyways, would be just after the first listen or two, there was be something that would wear off, because it is such a sort of underdog moment for them and such a sort of reinvention. And at this point, I'm not going to place any of the quality of this album or how it plays to me on the fact that it is so refreshing. I'm not interested in making any excuses for this band finally stepping up to the plate and rewarding the record as such. I just think the record is this fucking good. And yeah, sure, it's not the most original thing in the world, and it has a bunch of stuff that's lifted directly from a lot of other stuff like it. And you know, name me a fucking record that doesn't do that. There's
Exactly.
there's like 20 of them. So shut up is the thing about that. This is if somebody said to me that, hey, Nick Cave and the Killers are going to release an album next year, and you're going to like the Killers album more, I would I wouldn't even laugh at that. I wouldn't acknowledge it. As you'd be like, all right, that's just fucking word salad. Moving on.
No, you would, the first thing you'd say, you would be like, oh God, how bad's the Nick Cave album gonna be?
Well, yeah, well, no, because that's Nick Cave does not make bad music, but I just wouldn't. I would do the white guy flinching meme, and then I would have to segue into something else. So the point is, this is my album of the year. If there is something that comes along that beats it, I don't know what I'll do. I'll probably poop my pants and rub it on the window. I don't know. Fucking like, I just like.
Oh man. Menzingers need to come and put a record out right now just for that.
I like this more than the last Menzingers record.
Damn. That about does it. Favorite tracks and ratings for Pressure Machine. Jake, why don't you lead us off?
My 3 favorite tracks are West Hills, In the Car Outside, and Pressure Machine with some also Love to the Getting By, which I think that's a perfect closer. Least favorite, I think I gotta say Cody. I still think that's a really great song. It's just kind of the song that contains the things that Tyler and I talked about that just kind of occasionally make the album feel a little bit like awkward. That's kind of the one that contains the most of it, but it's still a song that's great enough to like coast by on its amazing elements. Like I think it's a good story, and it's got that guitar distortion at the end, which is just like fucking ascend. But like it's a good song. It's just the other songs are better. And this is a 9.5.
Whoa. Shit.
Shit.
Damn. All right.
And
it's a thick ass boy.
to favorite tracks, yes. Least favorite, no. Album of the year, 10.
Right on.
Live your truth, brother.
I had no other choice.
My 3 favorite tracks are Round the Back Street. West Hills. I'll also pick
Same energy.
In the Car Outside as
Yeah.
well, for obvious reasons that I went into. And oh yeah, Terrible Thing. Absolutely. Those 3 songs. Least favorite, to be honest, I'm not huge on, they're good songs. I'm not really huge on the stretch from Cody, Sleepwalker, and Runaway Horses. They're good songs. They're just not quite at the level of the rest of the record. So any one of those for me.
You heard Sleepwalker wrong. It's fine. Just
Yeah.
listen to that song.
Somebody replaced
They just didn't understand it.
Somebody replaced your file with something incorrect for Sleepwalker. It's just it ain't.
It's a good song.
Soul C was the wrong L.
Probably the weakest song. I didn't hear whatever that was, so never mind. Probably the weakest song is Runaway Horses. And just because I think that it's the rare song that, at risk of being mauled to death, Phoebe Bridgers doesn't really add much to. And also, I kind of roll my eyes a bit when the song comes in and Brandon Flowers are just like, small town girl.
See, that's the Lulu connection. I was waiting for anyone to find it, because that's when he says that, I can't escape being like, oh no.
Yeah. I
no.
just think that the lines small town girl shows up for her friends, crazy about the bins. I was there when she first put away childish things. Makes me roll my eyes a little bit, but it wouldn't be a Killer's record if there weren't a moment where Brandon Flowers makes me roll my eyes.
Sometimes you make me roll my eyes.
Oh, I know. Believe me. But that Runaway Horses simile is really moving and great, so it's not a bad song. So yeah, that would be my least favorite, and I give the album an 8 out of 10. So from only 3 ratings, but they're not here, so they don't count. It gets a 9.2 average, which is pretty fucking.
Oh yeah, baby.
Pretty fucking base. TBH, and that tells you a lot about the tone of this podcast. Anyway,
this is how I win.
Now it's
2 people down.
Now it's time to move into the second album we're going to review today, which is Bo Jackson, the legendary all-star in both football and baseball, as Wikipedia tells me, because I know nothing about sports and had to do a lot of research to understand that. Bo Jackson, legendary all-star in football and baseball, is a neat little emblem and reference point for the creative duo of Boldy James and The Alchemist, who are about as tightly wound and connected as a rapper and producer can be. They're basically like the Killer Mike and LP of abstract hip-hop, except for the fact that Alchemist doesn't rap, at least not on this record. So The Alchemist produced Boldy's debut album, My First Chemistry Set, in 2013. The Alchemist also produced Boldy's 2019 EP, Boldface, and most notably, The Alchemist produced the first of 4 albums that Boldy James released last year alone. That record being The Price of Tea in China, which is a really interesting album and worth checking out if any of this record appeals to you. The reason that Boldy put out 4 albums last year was not, I should emphasize, not sheer excess for lack of control, but the fact that Boldy was turning 37 and his career had only just begun. Boldy was a late bloomer, catching up on lost time and turning a world that had been ignorant of him into one that was hungry for him. His 2020 releases include handily the best rap album of that year, in my opinion, the stunning collaboration with the jazz musician Sterling Tolles entitled Manger on McNichols. And regardless of what you think of any of Boldy's subsequent work, including this, you have to hear that album. You have to, because it's totally unlike anything else in his catalog. The jazz instrumentation and production is just insanely good, and Boldy is hungry on that record in a way that reflects the fact that Boldy and Sterling spent 12 years making that album. And in many ways, Boldy, as I said, is playing catch up with all of the life he has lived, coming out in fits and spurts through the storytelling of his records. And that meticulous effort shows. Manger on McNichols has the raw immediacy and colossal sound of a lifetime masterpiece, and its impact and imprint will linger over Boldy's entire future catalog. And I say all this to make up for the fact that we never reviewed it, because I discovered it too late in the year. It would have been a great album to discuss, but we're catching up. And the fact that I think Boldy's a real talent and the fact that we didn't review that is part of the impetus for me really wanting us to touch on this. Which has not inspired him to slow down. In fact, he has reacted against the status the stasis and the satiety that such a career landmark like that album would usually bring, by demonstrating that this late bloomer still has plenty to flower yet. His last two records in the interim since Manger did not leave much of an imprint, but I would say he's returned pretty decisively here to flex his storytelling and flow muscles further and build on the price of tea in China. Now, I have plenty to say about this record. You'll be pleased to hear, but obviously I don't want to dominate everything. So I think probably be a good idea if I turn to you guys first and hear what you guys think about this record, what you guys think of Boldy, what you guys think of the Alchemist's production on this album, what your thoughts are in general on this album.
In a jams and tea first, I will be not mildly critiquing the production of the Alchemist, who is not somebody who, like, in the past we've been like he's not been the podcast punching bag that has been Kenny Beats. He's just somebody who showed up on albums and I think consistently has just sort of, not even by merit of being like average or anything, but like just by merit of the people he works with, or so, like on something like Haram, for example. It's just like, I don't go to that album for the Alchemist production. I don't go to that album for a lot of the production. While good, I don't go to it for the production as a whole. It's wallpaper for the fact that it's got some of the most dense lyricism in a hip hop album I've heard in the last 10 years. This, on the other hand, I feel like is working in basically perfect synergy with Boldy James as an MC. There's a lot of really hypnotic looping that's going on in the production that makes a lot of these songs, while initially I found some of them repetitive, with re-listen, I find them to have a lot of momentum and detail. A lot of them don't just repeat, they will repeat with ideas layered over themselves and elaborating, and sometimes the beats themselves will be a little bit like almost purposefully clunky, but in the sense that like it's basically A, accommodating Boldy, and B, sort of adding details to itself to throw you off guard. Like if you're an eagle-eared listener, you're going to detect lots of really interesting differences with how these loops are constructed. And a lot of them are just really transfixing, and a lot of them are just really immediate sounding, and some of them are particularly jazzy, some of them are really electronic. Basically, this is everything I've heard the Alchemist do in the past, and it's him doing it about as well as I've ever heard him do it. And it's complemented well by Boldy, who is, this is my first exposure to him. I've had I don't remember that McNichols
Manger McNichols, yeah.
That's such a fucking weird title. I've had that album recommended to me because I believe it was one of April's favorite albums of last year. And I really need to get around to it, especially now that since I like this project. This is my first exposure to him as like an MC, and it's definitely like, it's strange. I can really only talk about him by comparing him to other people, and that's not like a bad thing at all. Like a lot of the times that sort of heavy, husky, occasionally kind of monotone delivery does really remind me of somebody like MF Doom, but occasionally it's got something that's a bit more colorful, like you might expect from something like Freddie Gibbs on like Pinata or something. And a lot of the subject material is sort of in that vein too. It's kind of led together through like, it's sort of an exploration of Bo's identity, I think, or at least his constructed identity here. I don't know if that's like if it's like a facsimile, if it's character or whatever, but regardless of what it is, it feels vivid, it feels immediate, and it feels vital, whether or not he's talking about the rap game, whether or not he's talking about selling cocaine, or as it's said on the record, cocaina, which God, that line has just looped in my head ever since I heard it. And yeah, I just think this is a really, really, really great, solid fundamentals hip hop release from the year. I think it's a great showcase for pretty much everybody involved. I think Earl Sweatshirt has a fantastic feature on this, sounding like, to the point where it's like, I've listened to some rap songs a lot, and that is an album that it's just like, you're just listening to someone spiral, and it's kind of uncomfortable. His feature on here, I'm just like, dude, like, do you need me to call someone, Earl? You like he sounds like catatonic. That dude needs some milk. But regardless, I think the features are very well implemented. There's definitely a sort of like there's kind of a sense of camaraderie on here. I almost feel like when everybody shows up, everybody's kind of tightly locked in. It's very well syncopated together.
The features on this album, I think, are universally excellent and well employed.
Oh, there's not a single one I have a bad thing to say about. They're always a treat. They always feel, it wasn't Earl. There's another feature on here that I really like. And hold on, let me fucking
Benny the Butcher.
See. Yeah. Oh God, Benny the Butcher is so fucking. I mean, does he have any projects that are like well known and good? Because like between this and the fucking clipping album that he appeared on, I'm just like this kid.
Yeah,
it's
definitely an overlooked. I just want to, on the note of that, shout out he has one of my favorite bars on the album where he's like, hang on, I have to find it now. He's talking about, so obviously a lot of what this record is about, a lot of the stories that are told on this record are about like selling cocaine and living in crack houses and stuff. And he has this, and Benny the Butcher has this great line in his verse where he's talking about like, you know, how women would be working in the crack house alongside the men. And he says, because like crack house, cocaine is white. He has this line, I put a bitch in the White House way before Kamala Harris, which is which is just so funny when he says that. Every single time I hear it, I just crack up. Because it's
a cab.
It's just like on multiple levels. The wordplay is hilarious. So yeah, Benny the Butcher, a great feature.
I feel like that's not an outlier too. I think generally speaking, like, you know, if I have to like hone in on like anything complaint wise on this album, even though I think it's just very broadly, very, very good. It's an album that is incredibly easy to enjoy if you like anything like this. But the one thing is that at least until maybe that like final third a little bit, a lot of Boldy's delivery and some of his flows are a bit repetitive, and with the production being so inherently constructed about these like looping beats, occasionally that kind of wears a little itty bitty tiny bit thin, but there's enough variety and enough features to make that problem feel really, really diluted. And I feel like the storytelling and actual bars that he brings to it are basically enough of a distraction to the point where it's like, even if this does bother you a little bit like it does me, it comes down to barely being an issue in and of itself. This is definitely something that I feel like, you know, just if you're somebody who's just kind of been looking for something that's a bit more foundational, just a bit more easy to enjoy, then throw this on. It's a really like, I mean, it's kind of a chill listen. It's like, you know, it's a vibe, but like it's got a really great atmosphere about it that a lot of hip hop projects I've heard this year haven't quite had. They've been more focused on a little bit more lyricism and aggression. And, you know, those things are great. I love those things. But it's just nice to see something that's a little bit more old school, I guess. I found it very refreshing.
Totally. Yeah, and I kind of share some of your feelings about like maybe some of the flows getting a bit stale at certain points. It's weird to say something like this record feels a little bit too long and it's 44 minutes long. I think it maybe is a tad too long. But what I will say is that I think that almost to the point where this quibble about flows doesn't really matter is that the Alchemist's production and the light and variety that he gives it goes a long way towards really correcting for any of the stasis that might set in from that. And it's the production remains colorful, and I think more than either of the other two albums we reviewed where the Alchemist has like a name credit in the artist of the artist title, the Freddie Gibbs album and
like Diamond Dallas.
Like more than either of those other two Alchemist records that he has his name in them, he really feels like an integral part of the fabric of this album. And that's, I think, what's meaningful about the title, right? Bo Jackson, is that it cements the fact that this is meant to be seen as a record by Boldy James and the Alchemist as this one entity, where Boldy is the football player who's like really storming through and like doing all the hard work, and then the Alchemist is the baseball side of Bo Jackson, who's like knocking them out of the park and kind of like I don't know, maybe you can sports. I'm fucking gay. I don't fucking know what sports is.
Look, as somebody who played baseball, good enough.
Yeah, but anyway, so there's like it's Bo Jackson because he's this multifaceted sports person who's able to do these two completely different things, both perfectly. And that's the idea that they want to project, I guess, with this, is reinforcing their collaborative synergy. And that ultimately is at the heart of what makes this record really good. And I have to say, to a certain extent, it is kind of like having this as your first Boldy record is kind of like, not that I'm comparing Boldy's stature to Kendrick or anything, but it's kind of like if Damn was your first Kendrick album. Because it's a little, it's like,
oh, it's good, but like
it's a little lighter on its feet and more colorful and less kind of immediately focused than something like Manger or Price of Tea in China. But yeah, anyway, I digress. I still really, really like this album a lot.
Yeah.
Going to put multifaceted sportsman in my Twitter bio.
Yes, absolutely.
No, it's sports person. Excuse me.
Sports.
Multifaceted sports faggot.
It's got to be that.
Those are antonyms.
Well, that's and hence the multifaceted.
I contain multitudes.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Morgan, what do you think of this album?
I liked it quite a bit. Probably my favorite thing that we've reviewed that the Alchemist has been involved with, and as such, probably my favorite work of the Alchemist that I've heard. Yeah, my thoughts aren't too in depth, but I find Boldy James to be a really compelling storyteller and a really fantastic presence, and a lot of the stuff about previous Alchemist productions that kind of got under my skin are occasionally here. Excuse me, I'll point you to the repeated vocal hook that's sampled in Turpentine.
Yeah,
it just
damn, it's one of my favorite beats on the album. Fair enough.
I get it, but it's a lot.
I like the beat. I just don't like the vocal thing. Like I like everything else about it.
Yeah. But otherwise, this is definitely in top form in terms of how the album sounds. There's not a whole lot for me to latch onto thematically, but it's a gangster rap album, and look at my face. So fucking
yeah. No,
I do what I can.
I'm pleased you dug this, Morgan. I was hoping that it would be that kind of bit of breakthrough with the Alchemist. I think the hang-ups that we've had with the Alchemist production, or at least we've all had with the Alchemist production on the Freddie Gibbs album, and you guys had more so than me with the Arm & Hammer record, is less to do with his skills and abilities, and like he's molding himself to these particular groups in a way that either resonates with you in terms of what you enjoy about hip hop production and sound, or doesn't. This is just a record where he's in a mode that's more colorful and more playful, and I think he's able to graft his abilities to whatever figure he's working with in a really like beautifully smart and sensitive way. Like he's kind of like, just to draw a timely comparison, you could think of someone like Jack Antonoff, right? Who you might say that like you think their production on a record like Daddy's Home sucks ass, for instance, but you wouldn't say that like, I mean, you would say that, but you wouldn't say that like Jack Antonoff is a bad producer. He's molding himself to the artist and doing what they want him to do and helping them to kind of achieve the version of their aesthetic on that record that they want. And I think that The Alchemist is the same sort of thing, and it approaches production in the same sort of way. You can always kind of tell when it's him if you know what he produces like, and if you've heard a few of his records, in the same way you can recognize a Jack Antonoff production. But he's always molding himself to the creative world of the artist, rather than saying like, this is an Alchemist sound and this artist is just jumping on it. It's always like, and that's the best producers are able to do that. And so, so that I think is one of the great strengths of how this record sounds. I think Bo Jackson benefits from being a bit of a low stakes album. I think that's a good thing. It might be its biggest limitation, in the sense that it's not going to be a masterpiece. But as a talented figure and collaborator, Boldy knows how to get the most out of his work. And The Alchemist pulls his weight heavy as well. Like I said, I think this is the richest and most colorful work he's done on any of the albums we've reviewed that he has an artist credit on. It's worth remembering as well that The Alchemist is a veteran. Like The Alchemist has been producing hip hop since the 90s. Like he's been around, and he's kind of having a new wind, a new kind of phase of his career where he's kind of approaching this sort of elder statesman status in the hip hop production world. But it should be acknowledged that, like, just like with LP, where a lot of kids these days think of him as just the Run the Jewels guy, he's been around rapping and producing music since the late 90s, right? So there's these, and this seems to happen a lot now with these kinds of elder statesmen producer figures who reach the second wind in this new current wave where hip hop is more, I guess, prevalent in pop culture than ever. And so producers become these actually significant figures who are known in pop culture within the world of hip hop, more so than they might have been 10, 15 years ago. So that's part of it, I think. And, there's a certain extent to which as well, The Alchemist benefits from ways in which he resembles other producers in the way he cuts up samples, people like Doom. There's a track on this album where it's like the beat, the main kind of crux of the music of the song is like a really kind of raucous guitar solo. And it reminds me a lot of my favorite MF Doom song, which is Rap Snitch Nishes off of Food, which has the same sort of like guitar based loop, which I think is the best piece of production that has ever happened in hip hop. Sorry. That song was amazing.
Sorry, that's just a good fucking take,
but anyway,
honestly.
so yeah, I pick up on a little bit of that Doom stuff that comes through a little bit and some of his production too. But anyway, there's a lot of variety and stuff to shout out though. The circling piano and drum loops that open up double hockey sticks lower you nicely into the world of the album before you get, I think, one of the most satisfying beat switches of the whole year in this track, where the second half of it finds Boldy and Al on this new level. Boldy's flow in the second half of this track absolutely dominates. He's not a fast rapper by any means. In fact, he has this languorous style that I think puts him in clear company with a lot of the abstract rappers in his scene, including Earl, obviously, who's on this record as well, and Billy Woods and Elucid of Arm & Hammer, and whatever other abstract hip-hop rappers you want to name. His flow is very much akin to that scene, if perhaps a little bit more lumbering. But Boldy differentiates himself with, even though he has this lumbering flow, he has this real cutting directness and incredible talent for great writing and wordplay. And his directness is not to say that he isn't poetic or even oblique, but his wordplay is complex enough. And this is definitely a record you're going to want a lyric sheet for. But compared to some of the other abstract rappers we have reviewed, including, the two that I just named, Earl and Arm & Hammer, Boldy's work is less difficult to get into, more immediately impactful, especially when it's lifted up by such a strong production collaborator. And Uncle Al, as he's known, seems to understand him in the way that only a longtime friend can, designing beats for him.
Uncle Al.
Yeah, designing beats specifically for him. But, and this is something I picked up on an interview that was done with the two of them, The Alchemist didn't just design beats for Boldy that he would fit naturally on top of. He specifically designed beats to challenge Boldy to fit a flow around. And there are moments on this record where Boldy is locked into the flow of the song, and there are other moments on this record where he's kind of like, his flow is just happening. And the song is going on, and he's just fucking steamrolling it, and it works, right? Because of how confident of a performer he is. But there's this great, variance in this album between moments where he's locked in and moments where he's just kind of like pounding down onto the beat. He makes it look effortless the whole way through. I have to give him that. The way he fits tightly into the grooves of that prominent vocal sample and warbling trip hop sound of Turpentine is thrilling. I think his performance there is great. Makes for one of the most immediate and delightful cuts for me. I already talked about Benny the Butcher's feature on third track, Brick Mile to Montana. He's great. He shows up fantastic. Even when Bodie is on his hood storytelling shit, dropping verses about well-worn topics like drug dealing. He, I think, is particularly good at embedding and immersing you within the scenes of his stories and dropping enough knotty bars to have you really trying to keep up. That doesn't make Boldy the absolute best at what he does. There is the occasional bar on this record that doesn't quite land with the impact you'd hope. But I think Boldy's approach is more to drag you through these landscapes that he vividly details and then force you to kind of try and find yourself within them. In that regard, I want to shout out a verse from the song Steel Wool that I think is a real standout verse on this record.
Love that song, by the way.
I'm just going to read it because
the metaphor in the center of the song is so fucking clever.
Yes. These fellas ain't cut from my cloth because I'm steel wool. It's a great line. But yeah, I'm just going to read this verse because I think it's always fun.
About those fellas, Tyler?
I think there's more about
who was on the moon.
I think it's a lot of fun when I enjoy reading verses on rap albums. So I'm going to read this first verse on Steel Wool because I think not just because it's fun to read, but also I think it encapsulates.
Are you going to give us a beat?
It gives you, fuck off, gives you a good insight into how Boldy writes, an example rather than me just describing it. V8 in that straight, 4Gs on that black Cherokee, that gangster / pop mixed with trap karaoke. Turn the snow globe to a crystal ball, now that dog a 10. Type to turn a stone with many flaws into a flawless gem. Stack my money 10 foot tall, now I ball above the rim. Living above the law on the north with my brother M, could be locked up, but to those who know me, they say lucky him. Chop the whole block up, that's when we found out it wasn't them. Basement on Honda Civic, auntie maxing out her Bridget cup filled to the rim, probably smack the whip before I spill it. Knee deep in the dope game, 227, we the realist, cocaine on the skillet, kitchen smelling like acrylic, touch back with the 1,000-pack of pills trying to rape a village. Weed so loud, reeking through the vacuum seal, I can't conceal it. Made a killing to those that hate it, I made it and feel it. Sold dope all of my life, so shit, I only know one way to get it. That's a great verse. It's just absolutely delirious to get wrapped up in Boldy as a performer, and the way he describes something as simple as just like getting into a car with a drink it is really like
being loud, like
yeah exactly. It's so there's another great line in the song where he's like, my silence in the lambs, them little Bo Peep, which is just hilarious. I love that. Yeah, so there's just so much stuff like that there's a great moment in the chorus, like the ad-libs are always great as well. He's like half slab, golden retriever, this ain't no Purina, and then there's an ad-lib that's just like dog food. Oh, it's so good. And
so
the way he says stuffing 30 clips in my Glock will switch your whole demeanor is just really, really funny to me.
I should imagine.
But yeah, as you were alluding to, Jake, that central metaphor, these fellas ain't cut from the cloth that a fella cut from. I run with real wolves, come from the real hood. These fellas ain't cut from my cloth because I'm steel wool. And then the call back to Little Bo Peep and the fucking the wolves and shit is great. Like the whole, this is just one example. I could do this for every song, but I'm just going to do it here because it applies to every song. And that's the thing as well. I don't think that lyrically there's any weak tracks on this record at all. Like there have been on other records we reviewed in the past where certain tracks are kind of a bit, don't quite get there. Boldy's locked in on every song. And he's doing this kind of complex wordplay and scene setting really consistently in a way that's really entertaining. And sometimes it goes over your head the first time you listen to it because he's just so abstract and you don't quite get it. But once you sit down with the lyric sheet and the jokes start to become clearer, it's a lot more entertaining. I want to shout out back to Al's production. I want to shout out the soulful and jazzy loops of Photographic Memory. Love them. It's really arresting. And Boldy steamrolls them. He barely even tries to fit into the pocket, and Earl does the same. They're both just happening on this song. Their stark and startling bluntness is really just, attention grabbing. Earl's part of the chorus, he's writing shit 6 layers deep on this song, as haunting and discordant as Earl always is. Although you also get a sense that it's kind of, he's rapping in a way that's less intense subject matter wise. It's a little more, which isn't to say that it's lighthearted in any way, but it's kind of just, you get wrapped up in the intensity of how he delivers, but he's still fitting to the general less intense subject matter of the song. Even when he's talking about pouring grapes on the dates edged on the headstones over the grave. In any case, if I seem distant and reserved, give me space. So like this great, even though he's talking about imagery of gravestones and shit, it's still like just captivating, and you just get caught up in it. So yeah, great song as well. And also worth shouting out as well, Rock Marciano's feature on this song too, which is kind of like a counterpoint to Earl, because his flow is much warmer, it's faster, it's more conventional, but it still rides these rhyme schemes that are insistent and quite head spinning. I just love the counterpoint when you have Earl rapping like, double dealing motherfuckers coming in this club and killing shit. And then Rock Marciano comes in like, broke generational curses with my cursive. And it's like these two really different styles of delivery.
White boy's got bars.
And Rock has another great hilarious ad lib. He's like, my bitch in there squeaky clean, but the work was sitting in her cervix. And then there's an ad lib that comes in, boofed it. And then just lose it. And here's another great, just classic stupid line that I love, which is, all this chicken fellas came down with salmonella. which because he's referencing, sorry, I should say in the context of the song, he's referencing like, people pulling up with guns and like laying out caps and shit, and like people being terrified, like people just kind of chickening out literally from the scene. And then he says, all this chicken, they came down with salmonella, which is just a great line. I love
all those chickens.
And the shit was loud as a whisper, the stick spin you round like a twister. Just I love this shit. I'm all about it. White boy got bars indeed. So yeah, great song. Stove God Cooks delivers a great hook on Diamond Dallas, which is another album standout, I think. I love this song. Just the hook is really good. It's nice to have a song with a hook on it on this album that's kind of like really just bulldozing you. And his hook's great and quite lumbering, and I love it to bits. And the beat as well on this track is great. I think one of Uncle Al's most pretty and arresting. And also Boldy's great. I love the way he rides like a really consistent rhyme scheme on this song. Like every line ends on ander or a variation on that. In his verse here, let's just try and find some examples. I'll just read it. It's a great verse. There's only one verse in the song. Bricky's flaking like some dandruff, see more keys than some handcuffs. Turn 1 to 2, that's an and 1. Had to fix a 50, fuck a Sandra. Hand in hand, handing out them samples, late night show, Jay Leno, base rental, Nissan Stanza. Serving hard, arm out the window, turned my sitcho into a bonanza. Found a line down in Texarkana. Now we bossing like I'm Tony Danza. Smoking weed, staring at the cameras. Drank thicker than some Mylanta, taking heads like a Highlander, weighing up all that pipe cancer. Kill him, he don't got the right answers. Move villain down in Manchester, in the fire with them salamanders. Slap boxing off an Anchester, stepped on it some Alexanders. Make it reindeer like I'm Prancer. Wrist a chandelier, diamonds dancing, brick of girly like a private dancer. Met the plug at J. Alexander, swiping J's, never been a scammer. All my licks resemble Adam Sandler. 90-day run, Barry Sanders. One-way ticket with a transfer. 12 staking out on a camper. Can smell the fumes from the camphor. 12 racks pulling off in Landfear. Hellcat looking like a panther. So yeah, that rhyme scheme being basically the same.
To the end of that verse, I'm just I wish he said something about Tyler thirsting after Alicia Vikander.
Yeah, that's true. I was definitely doing that last night while watching The Green Knight. But yeah,
Yeah.
Happens to the best of us.
but yeah, I just love how Boldy can do these like really crazy complicated lines you don't get, and then just say some shit like "Make it rain, dear, I'm Prancer." Like, like it's just like the dude contains multitudes. Also,
Love the Dylan verse.
shout out to the guitar solo at the end of the song as well. Just a great touch that Alchemist brings in. Another standout song, Illegal Search Warrant. I love this track. Really
Yeah.
dynamic, lush instrumentals, vivid storytelling from Boldy depicting the title scene. And I also want to bring in this point as well. The difference between the street storytelling of someone like Boldy and someone like Freddie Gibbs, for instance, is that while Boldy is less of a dynamic performer than Freddie, he has this really uneasy way of getting under your skin and rooting there. Like he's rooted his rapping and his flows and his style is really rooted in like getting under your skin and like taking root, whereas someone like Gibbs is more interested in dominating and being this really confident, clear-headed character that wants to get your attention and bash you over the head. And I think this difference in character between these two figures, despite the fact that they tell similar stories about, you know, the cane, as Freddie would say, you get that dynamic in Fake Flowers, which is the song that Freddie is on. And Freddie approaches his verse with this highly energetic, manic tone, which is a stark contrast to the more somber, detail-oriented, meticulous description of Boldy. Then you get that guitar solo song, Third Person, which is just so fucking dope. That beat is so fucking just like fucking creaming. I like as well Boldy's description of himself on the song as the trap mechanic, which I think is such a great little moniker to give oneself as an abstract rapper that I'm surprised no one else has already thought of it. That should be how we describe Boldy in the future, as the trap mechanic. He's like, and he's telling these stories from the trap, but he's getting in there with the fucking spinner and he's like tightening up all the nuts and he's like taking it all apart and shit, and he's like giving you the skeleton and shit. That's a great way of describing him, trap mechanic. Love that. And yeah, I will say one of my least favorite production gimmicks that Alchemist does is that occasionally he'll do this thing where he like submerges the beat and like brings it down like it's being swallowed and then brings it back again. And it's kind of like a bit of a cheap thing to add dynamics to the song. And I think he kind of overuses it at certain points. It's nice when he just leaves the loop for Boldy to ride and then occasionally changes it up, which is nice because when you get to this point, Boldy, I think, is giving some of his most discomforting and dark storytelling on the entire album. This teasing of the listener that he gives when he says, how many times you think you can get away with murder? How many times do you think you can get away with murder, over and over again, as this hook into the song, between telling these morbid verses about how cutthroat this environment can be. It's great because you've had a lot of stuff that's felt a little bit more irreverent and you get some darkness to balance it out, and it's real nice. First 48 freestyle is everything Boldy does best. His storytelling at its most impactful. You have a rich but moderate flow that he never deviates from. Constant bars. Alchemist beat is not one of the album's best, but it's fine enough. And then Closer Drug Zone allows Boldy to leave the album in a place of momentum and reflection at the same time. Another of his more morbid stories, leaving you with the sense that the environment Boldy comes from is self-perpetuating and a place where lessons are rarely learned and only the most stubborn and hardy survive. And then you have this great little guitar lick that comes in just before the end of the song. That's like a grace note that the album ends on. And that's it. And yeah, I had a lot of fun. I love when we review these because I know they're kind of difficult to talk about without going into a lot of detail, but I find it really a lot of fun digging into songs that are this kind of complicated, that have these kinds of like really dense, heavy bars. But also are a lot of fun too. And I feel like this is one of the more fun and entertaining rap records of the year so far, which is, you know, surprising considering that it's, you know, an abstract hip hop record about working in a crack house. It just, I guess, shows how kind of lightweight this year has been for hip hop, to be honest. It's been a great year for music in a lot of respects. Haven't been a lot of really landmark hip hop releases, except for in the abstract world with that Arm & Hammer record, which is still one of my favorite albums of the year, and with this, which Boldy at his best. So yeah, dope record, really dig it. Glad we had the opportunity to review it, and so that I could give you my white boy got bars voice yet again.
Look, any excuse I can get to hear it.
Yeah, totally. Good shit. All right, glad you dug it. Favorite tracks and ratings then for Bo Jackson. I'll go first, and we'll go reverse order for fun this time. My three favorites are Double Hockey Sticks, sensational opener, Diamond Dallas, and I'll also say Third Person. Least favorite, if I had to pick one, I don't know, maybe EPMD, maybe. That song is pretty good, but I didn't really have much to say about it. And I'm giving this album, like Pressure Machine, gets an 8 from me.
My three favorites, I will say Steel Wool, Drug Zone, and Third Person. Least favorite, Turpentine, which is a good song, but as I said, they do be abusing that hook. And I will also give this an 8 out of 10.
Baller, Jake.
My three favorite tracks are Steel, Wool, Illegal Search and Seizure, and Third Person. Least favorite, probably gonna have to side with Morgan and say Turpentine, and I'm gonna give it a 7.5.
Sweet. So that's an average of 7.8. Yeah, I'd say a pretty fucking good episode overall, considering it was just the three of us.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a bit of a stopgap week, considering that last couple of weeks, we've had these really major album releases from big artists. And then next week we have Lord and Deaf Heaven, which are going to be,
oh God,
they're going to be,
are we not doing Between the Buried and Me?
I think they're penciled in for the following week. Because of those two being together, but we could maybe split it up, I guess, if you wanted to. We could see how it goes. The idea was
to balance like the heavy record and the pop record, and then we did the same thing again.
Yeah, because we've got churches and then churches in between the Buried and Me the following week.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So and there's just a lot coming out at the moment as well. Like Wolves in the Throne Room put an album out this week too that I want to listen to. I'm sure that'll be really good. Next week, also Halsey's record produced by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross is coming out as well. And Iron Maiden are putting a new record out too. So,
God, is that soon?
Yeah.
Holy
so
shit.
So we'll see how it goes. It'll really, I guess what we cover will just depend on how good all the albums end up being. But I mean, obviously, we're definitely
least we can mention them.
Yeah, we're obviously definitely going to be reviewing Colors too, because we have to complete the Colors duology. And I'm very excited to hear
only
that.
We could get August's dad.
If only.
No.
Yeah, and a good excuse for me to listen to the BT Bam albums I haven't heard yet, the more recent ones anyway.
Bam.
But yeah, anyway, let us know what you thought of either of the records we reviewed today. The Killer's new album, Pressure Machine, or Boldy James and the Alchemist's Bo Jackson. We'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Let us know if there's any other records we should be checking out as well. We love to hear from you. And we've been enjoying a lot of all the comments that we've been getting. Saoirse and August will both hopefully be back next week to help us tackle the titanic and already controversial new records from Lord and Deaf Heaven. I'm sure that regardless of where everyone falls on them, by the time we get to it, there'll be some really good conversations. So yeah, stick around for our video on Los Campesinos, Hold Down Now Youngster, my favorite album, as well as our 35th anniversary video on Paul Simon's Graceland. And yeah, but anyway, that's it for this week. Rock over London, rock on Chicago, wet and forget. Our products work, you don't.